Welcome back. I am Najeema Davis Washington, your host for this edition of The Forecast. With me today is retired Brigadier General Henry Taylor, and we are talking about independence. And we're going to talk and shift right now and spend some time talking about our family member who we recently lost, but will never lost because when I will never lose because when I think about Uncle Al, I have a smile on my face permanently. Um, Alfred Comfort was my father's brother, and Uncle Henry. Why don't you tell us about your relationship with Uncle
Al was my brother-in-law, just like your dad was my
Al?
brother-in-law. They're both brothers to my wife, Dell Taylor. And Dell and I have been married now for almost 48 years. And so I've been connected with this family since I was in high school. So it's been quite a while that I've been connected with this family. Alfred Comfort was a guy. As a matter of fact, with his passing just a week or so ago, a couple of weeks ago, my wife and I were talking about Al, and I said the only thing you can say, one of the main things you can say about Al is he lived an Alfred Comfort life,
Sure.
you know? And by that, he was always a man of humility. I never heard Al raise his voice. He worked as a tailor downtown. He worked at the post office.
Yes.
And he served in the Army Reserve up to retirement. He actually retired from the Army Reserve, Sergeant First Class. He was a Sergeant First Class in the Army Reserve. As a matter of fact, Uncle Al was laid to rest in his military uniform.
Yes. Yes.
And when you look at the Comfort family, there were several military service guys. Uncle Charlie was a
Yep.
long-term military guy. Uncle Preston,
Yes.
and so Al was all part of that. And certainly anytime I was around Al, we were able to have that camaraderie of former military guys. And so he was an inspiration. And as I mentioned, mild-mannered, always careful in his thinking, careful in his words,
Yes.
never said anything bad about anybody else. And so those are my memories of Al Comfort. And then, he raised a family that exemplify him as well, you know.
Exactly.
And so now he lived to be 90 years old. And yeah, he lived to be 90 years old. And, even up until the end, he was still dispensing wisdom
Yes, he was.
and dispensing wisdom.
And
And
love.
so, yeah, and love. So, to tie this back into our earlier conversations in terms of our experience in America,
Mhm.
I think Uncle Al is a perfect example how he lived through many iterations of the American life.
Yes.
And oftentimes when we speak as African Americans, we talk as if we've all had the exact same experience, when in fact we've all had our own individual journeys through America. And I think Al's a great example of that. We laid him to rest doing social distancing, but he got full military honors because of the honorable service that he gave to our country.
Yes. Not only in the Army Reserve, but also in the U.S. Postal Service. He wore a uniform twice for this country, and we honor him. That is the local lens, a very heart to heart, example here. In other local issues, you wanted to talk about COVID, and I think that's obviously incredibly important for us to be discussing. But within the last 2 weeks, and I haven't been back downtown recently to see, but the John C. Calhoun statue was removed in its entirety, I understand, from Marion Square. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think it's a good symbolic gesture. My life experiences cause me to always focus on the future and try to design a better future, understanding the past in order to put a foundation underneath us. but my focus has always been on the future. So I think the removal of the John C. Calhoun statue is a great symbolic thing. But I think more importantly, it's an indication of where we are as a country. You know, we've had this discussion about removing J.C. Calhoun from the green
Mm-hmm.
for decades,
Right.
right?
Yes.
What
Yes.
made this the right time? What made this the right time for the legislature and governor of Mississippi to say it's time to take the
Change
Confederate
the
bars
flag.
off our flag? Why is that? And I think it gets back to those three triangulating forces at work with us right now. You know, the vulnerability of the pandemic, the human approach to racial relationships, and then of course the political environment in which we find us. I think all three of those things are coming together. So I think the removal of John C. Calhoun is very symbolic. I think the most important thing would be is what now are actions that follow after that. And some of those disparities pointed out by the COVID experiences,
Yes.
where we find vulnerable communities paying the price in many, many different ways, this is the time to answer some of those. This is the time to translate the symbology into action,
Yes.
into a real change, into a different future.
A new world, a new
A
day.
new world, absolutely a new world. And I think part of that is the dialogue, the competition of ideas. And I think as African Americans, we need to bring our voices not only from the unified or consolidated experience we've had, but we
Right.
need to bring our voices from our individual
I
experiences.
agree with you 100%.
Yeah,
100%. If I could say, I have had anything but a typical experience.
correct.
I have had anything but a typical experience. Sharing, I I learned that as someone in the adoption system, you spend time in foster care. So as a baby, I was in foster care before I was placed with my loving parents, whom I adore, and my mother, who is so special to me. Before I was placed with a beautiful, loving, giving, educated, humble, excellent couple, I spent time with those who had had nothing. And just, but the fact that my life went on a complete other trajectory from there, I I humbly say that I had an experience that some children not born to their own parents had. I went to schools where presidents' wives were educated. I went to I've traveled the world. I've learned different languages, but my experience has been so different from so many other Black children. And I recognize that. The fact that I attended elementary school where my father was the principal, and I got to see so many different types of Black children who weren't like me. Because remember, now I'm an only child too. So there's that, like, isolation, but then to go out and see so many other things, and then to get to Spelman and to see a whole nother level of Black excellence and Black experience. So yes, as we said in February, we are a monolith in that we move together by our sheer number, but we are not a monolith in thought and experience and spirituality and philosophy. We are not a monolith in that regard. So um, we as African Americans, yes, must bring all of those various ideas to the forefront. I'm going to pivot to I Am Not Your Negro for a second. That's the film lens of this particular episode of the forecast. Now, you said you had not seen the film, but you did watch the trailers. Did you want to talk about any of that?
I did. I did watch the trailers. And of course, James Baldwin has been a voice in the Black experience for quite a long while. I mean, even when I was in high school, we used to read James Baldwin writings, etc. The thing that again, I've not seen the entire film, but the thought that I would offer is that the America described during that time is not the same America today. You know, the America of that time, just as an example, We talk today about not having enough African American in high executive positions in Fortune 500 companies, et cetera. Well, I can guarantee you back then that number was zero. That
Right.
number was zero. And so now we're arguing about what is the right number. So it's different. However, and again, this is where competition of ideas and the sharing of individual experiences becomes so important. Because what he draws is a framework through which we can look at where we are today.
Uh-huh.
We can look at where we are today, and I think there's value in that. And if you look at our experience, even in my lifetime, I'm just 71 years old, but in our lifetime, I remember us going from colored to Negro to Afro American to Black to African American. Each one of those has its own message
Yes, it does.
because each one of those come from a different foundation in terms of racial pride, racial acceptance, just like you were saying, uh, different experiences. Each one of those has its own foundation there. So I think it presents a framework which is important, and I think it's important for us to engage with our minds. I always I talk to a lot of groups. One group that I talk to every year for the last 4 years is at the Citadel. I speak to one of their seminars, and I always remind them about the name that Colin Powell gave to his book, his autobiography. It's called My American Journey.
Yes.
I like that name because he didn't say the American journey or an American journey. It is my American journey. And I think each one of us has a journey to share.
Mhm.
And so when you look at uh, writings and thinking by people like James Baldwin, it gives us a
Mhm.
framework in which we can articulate what my life experience has been, what my American journey has been. And then we keep building on my journey, your American journey, my American journey,
Right.
so that we build a different world going forward.
With
So
a
I'm
beautiful multicolored American flag with our stories.
yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, I
So
certainly hope that you have a chance to watch the film because
will.
it's a video essay. You had a chance to see part of it, maybe a couple of clips and trailers, but I can't speak to your experience, but I would like to have another conversation after you see the film to see whether or not you still feel like the America described is much different from the America that we're experiencing today. Because I will have to say, there were some quite poignant points and quotes that just, made me think about it in this context. Like, is it really that different? Have we really seen that much progress? So we'll have to make sure we bring you back another time to talk about when you've seen the film. I didn't want to interrupt you. Did you have something else to say around this particular topic around our American journey?
No, I think you've kind of wrapped it up good. I again, I grew up under Jim Crow. I know what it felt like to go into a
Mm.
store and be treated like you're nobody. I know what it's like to not be able to go into the front door of a movie theater. I know what it's like to be run away from public events. As I mentioned, I'm 71 years old. I've not had those experiences in the last 40 or 50 years. So are we the same? No. And I always, one of my 10 lessons, I think I shared this with you one time, of 10 lessons. One is all in none. I won't say all the things that he may describe are different, or none of those things are different. I'm sure there are some enduring things that we need to continue to attack and take on. But my American journey, I've seen a difference from where I was when I was growing up and going to high school, what I've been able to experience visiting 48 of the 50 states, visiting 30 countries around the world. For me, it is a different experience.
Do you feel as though we have progressed in a manner that is complementary to the time?
I think that's a tough question because each time has its own predicates, right?
Mhm.
Like we started out our first session talking about three major forces taking place now. Those will have an impact on how we digest the times in which we're in. Those will have an impact on the zeitgeist going forward, or the spirit of the time going forward.
Mhm.
Each segment of our American history has had its own predicates. You know, there was a time when a major predicate in the political thinking in the United States was slavery.
Yes.
There was a time when a major predicate in political thinking in the United States was women's suffrage.
Right.
Each predicate drives a different sense of where we are and what we do. And so, you know, again, all or none, there are some enduring things. There are some enduring things. You know, one last point I would make in terms of the predicates of the time, for me personally, I think the Jim Crow predicate has much more bearing on where we are today.
I agree.
You know, much more bearing. So,
I agree.
you know, I'm sure that's why we have competition of ideas, right? So we can learn from each other and learn from those who went before us. And I'm certainly open to that as well.
I'm so appreciative of your time. I'm going to ask one last question. It's a personal and perhaps a little selfish one, and it could open a big old can of worms. But um, is it un-American for us to question our Constitution? Is it un-American for us to question the set of laws under which we have been operating? Or, as you have said before, did not the founding fathers, in all their imperfection but wisdom, set in place a system for us to shape this country in a way that fits in best with the world?
Well, direct answer to your questions, whether it's un-American, my absolute answer is no. I think it's more American.
Mhm.
You know, there are provisions in our Constitution that if the people don't like the way we're being governed, we can get rid of the whole thing and start all over again. We can. We've never done it,
Right.
but that's what they
We
did.
also never founded a country before, right?
Right. But that's what they did, right?
Yeah.
They came together and they put stipulations in there. If the people don't like it, the people can change it. And so, no, I think questioning the execution of the principles in the Constitution, I think, is a foundation of our democracy. You
Yes.
know, and that's where the Constitution idea is. So, question is no. The laws, absolutely not. That's why we have That's why we have elections. If we have laws we don't like, we elect people who are going to change those laws. You know, so no, I think this is part of the American way, and I don't measure being American un-American by just blind loyalty. I mean,
Right.
you have to have loyalty to something. For me, as a military officer, it was loyalty to the principles in the Constitution, not an individual person, not a president, not a political party, but to those principles that say, for example, you and I have the guaranteed right to think what we want. We have the guaranteed right to believe what we want, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, are those worth standing up for? To
Yeah.
me, is yes.
Absolutely.
It's yes.
Absolutely. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Those are God-given rights.
Yeah. And I am proud to fight for them.
Great.
And I am so very happy. Thank you, Uncle Henry, for your time with us today on the forecast, A New Day. I hope that you will join us again in the future to talk about um, a new American creed. I'm just going to drop that here, as we talked about, briefly before. But the idea of, like, what are our values going forward? What are we standing for, America? This was the forecast, A New Day, the Independence Edition, recorded Sunday, July 5th, 2020. My name is Najeema Davis Washington. This is the forecast. Thank you for joining me. Have a good day.